Welcome to another episode of Cal's Corner Radio here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host. And folks, this is a very special show. I just want to share with you my honest opinion. This is going to be a two-parter minimum. It's up to our guest to decide how many more parts he wants. Now, whom am I referring to? I'm talking about the one and only Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who is a legendary figure in the field of ufology. Ufology, of course, ideally is supposed to be the scientific study of UFO reports. Bruce is a longtime expert in this area. I've admired his work, and he's here for a special two-part series of interviews to talk about a lot of things. So welcome, Bruce, to Cal's Corner Radio here on X Zone Broadcast Network. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a nice little corner.
Thanks.
Maybe it's a big corner.
Well, we try. Bruce, I'm truly honored and humbled that you've agreed to be on the show. Why don't you introduce yourself briefly, give us some of your background, and tell us why you're interested, what got you interested in the subject of UFOs?
Having grown up as a child in a small town of Vermont back in the late 40s and through the 50s and so on, I heard occasionally about UFOs, what were called flying saucers. And I read a book called The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, who was the head of Project Blue Book, a project run by the U.S. Air Force. I read that in high school, and it made a little bit of an impression on me. It seemed that Ruppelt was sitting on the fence with respect to UFO reality, whether the UFOs were something extraterrestrial or not. I got the impression it wouldn't take much of a push to get him off the fence onto the ET side. But anyway, that was a 1958-59 time frame. I didn't think much about the subject again until about 10 years later in the 1960s. The latter half of the 1960s, there were lots of big sightings in 64, 65, 66 time frame. And the Congress directed the Air Force to hold an independent investigation, which turned out to be in 68 and 69. So they call it the Condon study.
Yes.
Yes, and at that time I was in Washington, D.C., going to American University to get a PhD in physics. And two gentlemen came to the university to give a talk on UFOs. They were both from an organization called the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP. And they said, the thing that's really stuck in my mind was, they said, we can use volunteer help at the headquarters. And I happen to know the headquarters was right down the hill, so to speak, from American University, New Hampshire Avenue in Washington, D.C. So I went there. NICAP was an organization that was mentioned in a lot of UFO books that I had read to try to find out what was going on by reading books. And so I expected a big organization. When I got there, I thought it was a top floor of a row house and being run on a daily basis by a sort of a little old broken down lady who happened to be very intelligent.
Okay, so just to interject here real quickly, a lot of people, let's say millennials or later, younger people, have no idea who or what NICAP was. This is, again, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. They were, correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, but they were at that time in the late 60s or early 70s the largest UFO group?
Yes.
Okay, so what happened is they were located near where you were going to school to get your PhD in physics. You, once again, were intrigued by the subject because it was in the news. There was this Condon Committee investigation. Congress was involved. The Air Force was involved. You went to visit NICAP only to see that the world's largest UFO group at the time was actually run by an elderly woman, you said?
Yeah.
Continue from there.
Well, one thing that had puzzled me from the books that I read was the explanations that were offered for sightings.
Mm-hmm.
And if sightings could be explained, why was there all this big to-do about sightings?
Right.
And one thing that puzzles me was the sightings sometimes, the explanations didn't fit the sightings. Things like the Air Force claiming that somebody saw the planet Venus in the
Mm-hmm.
sky when it was clearly moving, or uh, Venus was on the other side of the Earth at the time, or something like that. And it made me wonder why in the world. Oh, by that time in 1968, the UFO subject, or flying saucers, had a 20-year history already. It started in 1947, which I
Mm-hmm.
get into a bit on later. But by 1967, 68, the subject had been around for 20 years, and the question in my mind was, why hadn't it been solved already? If
Mm-hmm.
sightings are explained, why is anybody going to any trouble trying to investigate them? So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
here, if I go to NICAP, I can look through the actual case files and see what really is going on. That's a lot better than reading what people wrote about it in books.
Right.
So
Right.
I went there and I found this lady running the whole office. The office was stacked with books and stuff, and uh, she is handling the whole thing by herself. I was the only person who decided to volunteer. I don't know how many people at American University heard the two gentlemen talk about uh, volunteer help, but I showed up there and I did do volunteer help, and that's what got me into active investigation with the NICAP subcommittee group in the Washington D.C. area, and over the next few years, investigated some cases, and I was always asking myself, where is the explanation for this? Are people going crazy or something like that? Is it a
Mm-hmm.
hoax? And the very first sighting that I went on investigation
Mm-hmm.
involved a lady who claimed she saw green lights passing over her car as she was driving along a road called Tuckerman Lane, just west of Washington, D.C., northwest of Washington, D.C. And we went to her house, found her I think she was a teacher, and her husband was a CPA, certified public accountant, and obviously not nuts, and neither one of us could we imagine they were trying to hoax. We drove along the same road that she claimed she saw these green things going over, and there wasn't any green thing that could be passing over this road.
Mm-hmm.
We're left with a conundrum. It certainly didn't seem to be a hoax or people being nuts or whatever. To me, it remained unexplained, and still does to the day. There are other cases, even more bizarre, shall we say. In one case from 1971, I think it was, and I ended up writing an article to send to Scientific American
Mm-hmm.
way back in 1974. A very brief history of the subject is that there's a big flap that started the thing off in 1947, late spring, early summer. As a matter of fact, we're coming up on the 71st anniversary of the first publicized sighting, Kenneth Arnold, June 24th, 1947, at 3 p.m.
Yes.
And it'll be in 2 days, we'll be having the 71st anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
Then after that, the sighting rate dropped down somewhat, and then went back up to a big peak in 1952, then dropped down and had another peak in 1957, 58, and it's sort of going up and down, up and down. By the time I got interested in it, the Air Force had collected 10,000 or something sightings from all sorts of types of people and walks of life and whatever. When they actually closed Project Blue Book in 1969, the Air Force had 13,000 sightings, of which they claimed that about 700 of them, 701 I guess it was, couldn't be explained or had not been explained. I shouldn't say that the Air Force claimed something couldn't be explained. The Air Force always claimed that everything could be explained, but if you couldn't come up with an explanation, you could leave it as an unknown, with the assumption that given more information, you could explain it.
Yeah, let me ask you about the use of the classification unknown, because when I started studying UFO reports after Well, it was actually before I met Stanton Friedman in the 1970s. So in my case, I started on October 18th, 1973. It surprised me when I looked at the the library had all of the Project Blue Book books. And what surprised me was this category unknown. It's like, okay, but what does it mean? I found it to be useless because unknown means we just don't know. And yet it's taken by UFO believers as proof that, oh, there's something exotic going on or maybe aliens. It's taken by skeptics to say we don't know, so you've proven nothing. Why do you think, or can you tell, why would they come up with something so vague? Why didn't they have a category? Could be an alien spacecraft.
Well, the categorization into knowns and unknowns, or into knowns and insufficient information and knowns. There's three basic categories that the Air Force, in a big study called the Battelle Memorial Institute study, Special Report 14.
Yeah, 14, yeah.
You had the ones that were known, the ones that were unknown, and the ones that had insufficient information were separate. Knowns definitely were things like stars, aircraft, birds, planes, whatever could be up in the sky, balloons and stuff like that, whatever could be up in the sky and misidentified by a witness. Unknowns were ones that they couldn't come up with a positive identification for. And their definition of unknown was sort of like, we couldn't figure out what it was, but we are certain that if we had more information, we could have explained the unknowns.
Okay, Bruce, we have to take a commercial break. Hate to butt in. We'll be back after this commercial. Thank you.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV. Plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
We live in rapidly shifting times of extreme volatility and uncertainty. Such profound change brings a unique opportunity for the evolution of consciousness. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio Show, a program that explores the latest scientific developments and deepening spiritual truths supporting human evolution. Join me on xzbn.net, where I interview leading experts in science, physics, medicine, spirituality, and more. By applying divergent viewpoints to leading-edge topics, we uncover expansive and evolutionary truth to assist you on your path to enlightenment. More information and past episodes are available at missionevolution.org.
Welcome back to segment 2 here on Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, of course, and the executive producer of the show is the one and only Rob McConnell. Now, for those of you who listen to the show, you know that we cover everything from politics to the paranormal. In this case, we have a very special guest here, the one and only Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who is a legend, as they say, in the field of ufology. He is a very serious, credible scientist who has studied some of the hardest so-called UFO cases, and he continues with his explanation on what the differences were. What is meant by the term unknown when the U.S. Air Force investigated UFOs for decades under Project Blue Book, which was the name for most of the years that it investigated UFOs, at least officially. And there were categories of sightings, a small group of which I think it was about 19.7%, as I recall in the Project Blue Book 14 report, that said that these reports were unknown. So Bruce, go ahead and continue. Sorry I had to interrupt you there, but we had to take a commercial break.
Well, I was telling about the insufficient information class.
Mm-hmm.
The insufficient information classification was a report had insufficient information if you couldn't prove that it was unknown, or you couldn't prove that it was known.
Right.
So, but the fact that they had insufficient information and unknowns as well, with the advisement that unknown meant we can't figure out what it is, but if we had more information, we could probably figure out what it is. Means unknown should have been part of the insufficient information.
Right.
But for some reason they weren't. So why were they segregated out? And the answer is the unknowns had characteristics about them that rejected or forced you away from all known explanations, leaving you to have some unknown explanation. And the Air Force made it clear that extraterrestrial. Well, now I have to jump back in time. 1940, when this all began, the Air Force began investigating sightings. In 1948, in the fall of 1948, the people who were doing the investigations in the so-called Project Sign decided that the main testimony they had available, this is all based on testimony, witnesses of all sorts, very weighted towards Air Force people. They couldn't explain these cases, and there seemed to be characteristics about them that were going to reject all explanations, and they wrote a report that's been called the estimate of the situation, in which they said the estimate was these things are actually interplanetary, to use their term. And General Hoyt Vandenberg, who was the chief of staff of the Air Force at the time, this is September of 1948, they took this report directly up the chain of command to the general and said, what are we going to do about it? And he says, sorry, wrong answer. Basically, he rejected the interplanetary. Now, up to that point, they had a number of possibilities for explanation. It could be an American project that was rejected, a Soviet project that was rejected, balloons, aircraft of some sort, astronomical events, birds, whatever. The typical explanations that you would get, and then explanations, delusions on the part of the hoaxes, and delusions on the part of the witnesses. And they also had, up to that point, the possibility that there was something coming from the outside. A lot of these objects looked very much like solid aircraft that were of a design that was nothing that we human beings had made. So the general told them, sorry, wrong answer, when they said interplanetary. And that was a policy change that forced them to never use ET, even though they might think it was. So if some unknowns were ETs, they couldn't say so, so they would simply say unknown.
Okay, you raise several important points. That, of course, is the crux of it, as you just mentioned it just now. Now, if we can back up just a little bit to recap, because again, a lot of people listening to this, they don't know what Project Blue Book is, sign or grudge. They don't know what the estimate of the situation report was. Now, what you're saying is that there was an assessment written by the Air Force called the estimate, short version of it, the estimate of the situation, meaning what was going on at the time. And there was a conclusion in there that UFOs were interplanetary spacecraft or vehicles. That conclusion, that report was kicked up the chain of command, and it was rejected. And then ever since then, the pressure was on, is what you're saying, to avoid that type of speculating, even if the data seem to indicate that they may have been from somewhere else?
Well, at the very least, not made here.
Yeah, not made here. Well, okay, let's say not made here. Now, realistically, especially considering the times, if it wasn't made in the USA, there's really not that many other places it could be made. You couldn't say made in China, not back then in 1947.
Well, not only that, but characteristics of these objects indicated something strange was going on. One of the first characteristics of these objects was noted by the first guy to have his sighting publicized. That's Kenneth Arnold.
Let's talk about the Kenneth Arnold case, because that is also the subject of your new book and all about it. So go ahead, Bruce.
Yes. For a period of 3 minutes in the middle of the afternoon of June 24th, 1947, the world changed. There's a man who was highly credible, technically oriented, and so on, saw these things go traveling past him from north to south, as he was 20 some miles west of Mount Rainier, and these things went past him, past the mountains, all the way south to Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, and he timed the flight between these two mountains, which are volcanoes, and timed the flight. And he figured out later on that they had traveled something like 50 miles in 102 seconds. That comes out to be around 1,700 miles an hour. But the way they flew, I want to emphasize, his description of them skipping from place to place, flipping and flashing in the sun. Definitely not a smooth, continuous motion, but erratic, sort of. And to use one of the descriptions, like if you tossed a saucer, skipping a saucer on the water, they go along in a jumping manner from one point to another.
Okay, so these objects
move so fast and were so jerky that he could not imagine that a human being could be living inside one. In other words, the idea of extreme acceleration, throwing out, rejecting the possibility of a human being being in there. And I want to now connect that with something which is highly timely today. 2004, the Nimitz event. David Fravor, who was the pilot of one of the jet aircraft off the Nimitz, referred to seeing one of these things he called shaped like a candy known as Tic Tac. And his motions were very jerky from one point to another. It seemed to travel instead of a continuous uniform motion. And he wondered whether or not a human being could even withstand the accelerations. I calculated that one of these was measured for a period of time on radar by Kevin Day, and it traveled 28,000 feet from a level of 28,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean in about 0.8 of a second. I estimated that you could do that with a continuous acceleration, a constant acceleration downwards till you get to the halfway point, and then a constant deceleration to slow you down, like slamming on the brakes for the rest of the distance. And so doing, you'd have an acceleration of 175,000 feet per second squared, I think it was, or something like that. 5,000 times greater than the acceleration of gravity. It would be like, instead of you weighing 150, 200 pounds, you weigh 5,000 times more than that. And that would be enough to turn you into a ball of jello on the floor.
Hmm.
It's
If it were
the
occupied
connection
by a human.
from Kenneth Arnold in 1947. This jerkiness motion all the way to 2004 over the Pacific Ocean near the Nimitz aircraft carrier.
Okay, you've mentioned, of course, two very different cases decades apart. We'll go back and review them, but let's go back to Arnold briefly. There are people, and I'm familiar with, of course, this case and some of the background on it. Some people had thought that this case was actually solved years ago when former San Francisco Chronicle journalist Key Davidson had said that he had evidence that what Arnold saw was a series of meteorites that were skipping along the surface of the Earth, and that would, explain some of the motion that was reported. Now, what we're going to, can you explain why that is not possible in your view?
Well, for one thing, meteors that get close enough to the Earth to start heating up and glowing, they heat up and they glow, and then if they slow down, they stop glowing. They don't glow and then stop glowing and then glow and then stop glowing. As they lose heat, as they gain heat, they heat up and they glow, and then they lose heat and they leave the Earth. Now, these objects that Arnold saw, he definitely reported saying that they were flashing, as they seemed to be tilting left and right as they were flying along, and flashing in the sun. And that's not what a meteor does. These flashes, he said, were so bright they lit up the inside of his airplane. That's one reason. Another is the speed. Meteors are traveling 20, 30,000 miles an hour as they go past the Earth. You can't skipping meteors. There have been skipping meteors where they...
Okay, we'll be back after this commercial break, Bruce, and we'll continue.
From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Den.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on SimulTV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is SimulTV. SimulTV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. SimulTV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have SimulTV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to the third segment here on Cal's Corner radio show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is, once again, Rob McConnell. Now, joining us as he has for this entire show, and he'll be back next week for part 2 of this series, is the one and only Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who is a top UFO researcher. He's also a physicist, and he is telling us about the Kenneth Arnold sighting, which is credited with kind of starting the UFO craze, if you will, or at least coining the term flying saucer into modern culture. This was because Kenneth Arnold, a pilot, had seen a series of objects, and I had asked the question, raising the issue that many years ago in the Bay Area, many people thought that this case was actually solved, that it was perhaps a bunch of meteors that were skipping along the atmosphere of the Earth. Bruce was explaining why that is likely not the case before I rudely interrupted him for the commercial break. So Bruce, continue, please.
Very well. I will continue with the same case. And I'd like to bring up a point which illustrates what I said some time ago at the beginning of this discussion, that I wondered why some of the explanations didn't seem to fit the descriptions of the reported phenomena. Here in the Kenneth Arnold case, which is sort of a microcosm of a whole ufology in a sense. Guess what the official explanation by the Air Force is for Kenneth Arnold's sighting?
What was it?
Mirage.
A mirage.
A mirage.
Okay.
Now, our mountaintop mirages, if you're almost at the altitude of the mountaintop, some maybe tens of miles away, and you're looking at the top of a mountain, and if there's a layer inversion of temperature variation going upwards in the atmosphere, you can get an image of the top of the mountain to appear above the top. So you see the real top, and then above the real top, you see an inverted image of the top. And
yeah, I understand what you're saying. I want to add something to that because I can. If you and I had this interview too long ago in the past, I could not. But that type of thing you're talking about, I have personally witnessed in states like Arizona, even in northern Arizona up in the Grand Canyon area. But I also lived in the Seattle area. I'm very familiar with Mount Rainier, and I'll tell you, anybody who would come up with that explanation, especially in that area, they're on something, because it's just not going to be possible. That's my honest opinion, having seen both types of locations and having lived in that area.
Well, from the point of view of the physicist, the mountaintop mirage is a mirage of the mountaintop, and guess what? It stays above the mountaintop. And one of the key things that Arnold talked about was these objects starting at his far left, up in the north of where he was, going past him, traveling over the mountain, over the tops of lower mountains, and past the sides of the taller mountains, in particular Mount Rainier. So in other words, he described something which was moving rapidly. Nevertheless, the Air Force could get away with, now this is, as I said, goes back to the order by General Vandenberg that essentially interplanetary was not an acceptable explanation. They could not say what they might have thought it was, so they come up with any explanation. That's what I call any explanation in a storm. Sort of philosophy. To even suggest that it was a mirage, you'd have to be an idiot. And I know the Air Force guys weren't idiots. They just figured that, well, we can't do what we think we ought to be able to do, so therefore we're going to just do anything. Now, the book that I published called 3 Minutes in June, I listed, I think, I studied 8 of 14 explanations. And a number of explanations have been offered for Arnold's sighting in the past. Starting with his own, he thought he was looking at a highly advanced American aircraft. That's what he thought.
Hmm.
And he told his friends about them, and that's how the story got out. And then the news media got interested in it and interviewed him, and trying to characterize these objects. Some, well, he had said they were like skipping a stone on the water or skipping a saucer on the water. And some brilliant newsman, nobody knows exactly who it was, but collapsed this into a description, collapsed the description of the way they flew into the description of the objects, flying saucers, making you think that they had to look like saucers, whereas
Mm-hmm.
that was the way Arnold said they flew, not that they were of the shape of saucers.
Right. Yeah. I understand. And thank you for clarifying that because, again, a lot of people, especially the younger generations, are unaware that Arnold didn't literally describe flying saucers. But let me ask you this, Bruce. You're the government. This sighting comes out of nowhere. It's not the only sighting, but this one is on the front pages across the nation. It even gets global coverage. Isn't it kind of predictable, but not necessarily wrong? What is your opinion for the government to kind of say, it was this, even though maybe deep down they may have suspected something else? And I have to ask you this question. What has bothered me as a UFO researcher and my limited, expertise in history, when I spent 10 years in Europe and then also another 7 years in India, I met, especially in Europe, all kinds of former intelligence people, people who were involved in the Cold War, people who would laugh and say, oh, I'm having a beer with you now, but 10 years ago I would have wanted to kill you because you were American. We were at war, blah, blah, blah. The one thing I never really saw or ran across was anybody who had the secret UFO files, any defectors. After the Soviet Union fell, they were selling everything, including tanks, but no secret UFO files. Seems like Mossad doesn't seem to care about the subject. So how do you compare the behavior of 1947, the way they kind of just wanted to stomp this out quickly, explain it as swamp gas or pelicans or mirage, whatever, versus, say, over the years and decades, the way they would suddenly be open with this Tic Tac case and say, here's the footage, we can't explain it.
Yeah, well, you're collapsing a lot of questions into.
I realize that, yeah.
The Air Force initially treated this as a serious situation. They checked. One of the first things that they did was bring in the FBI. In the summer of 1947, they brought in the FBI to interview witnesses and find out if there was any possibility of these sightings. People. Well, let me say that first. That Kenneth Arnold's sighting was publicized because he was a pilot, because he had good credibility, and because he thought, and so did his friends, that it must be some new development of the Air Force. There have been so many new developments in technology over the 5 or 6 years previous that people would almost expect anything amazing.
Right.
They wouldn't be surprised that some amazing object was flying over.
Right.
Arnold was the first to be publicized. People had sightings of things before, in the months and weeks before Arnold's sighting, but they didn't tell anybody. They didn't tell anybody because they would say, I was seeing something strange up in the sky, and other people would think I was going crazy. When Arnold went public, he didn't expect this to be cause as big a flap as it was, but the newsmen say that the initial story went out, and then they got flooded with requests from news organizations throughout the world for more information about these extremely fast saucer-shaped objects. I point out again that it was not necessarily saucer-shaped, but that was the term that was used, flying saucers. After his sighting was publicized, people started saying, oh, somebody's interested in what I saw, and so they began reporting things to the newspapers and there may well have been several thousand sightings made in that 1947 flap, of which at least 800 or 900 have made it into newspapers and were picked up by interested in UFO investigators many years later. So back in 1947, the Air Force called in the FBI to see if there's any subversion. The FBI interviewed some witnesses and decided there was nothing to it, nothing of interest to them. And the Air Force investigated and decided they better set up a project to investigate further. One of the first conclusions by the Air Force was these objects are real and not visionary. That's a terminology used in a report in September of 1947 for General Nathan Twining, making a recommendation that the Air Force set up an independent project, which turned out to be Project Sign. Then that lasted a year or so, and they changed the name to Project Grudge, and that lasted until 1952 when it became Project Blue Book, and it lasted until 1969. Throughout all these projects from 1948 on, late September 48 on, they would have various types of explanations offered, but never do they suggest interplanetary. However,
let me ask you.
File, the interplanetary was one of the things that was considered. You asked about secret files.
Mm-hmm.
The Air Force had stuff that they wouldn't even tell themselves, I guess. It wasn't until 1975 that the files of Project Blue Book were released in microfilm. And some of us started messing around, digging out stuff that was very interesting. And then over the next 10 or so years, there was 900 some pages that was pried out of the CIA, 1,600 pages out of the FBI, and hundreds of pages out of Air Force intelligence in the time frame around.
Okay, Bruce, we have another commercial break. We'll be right back after this station break, folks, and Dr. Bruce Maccabee will tell us about secret classified UFO documents.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howe will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
The concept of a new age has been around since the late 19th century, yet much of its original meaning has been lost. What exactly is the new age? Is it a religion, a collection of obscure esoteric practices, a series of doomsday predictions, or an astrological event? The New Age Chronicles is a unique complementary publication bringing reason and grounded information to separate fact from fiction. Chock full of valuable information to support you as we make the monumental shift into the new era. You won't want to miss a single innovative issue. The New Age Chronicles newspaper is coming soon to www.newagechronicles.com.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Kal's Corner radio show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Kal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, folks, we've had for this, the entire show here, our special guest, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, who's a world-famous, literally, UFO researcher. He's absolutely one of the top UFO researchers. And Bruce was telling us about the U.S. government, how they were reacting in 1947, kind of downplaying or poo-pooing the idea that UFOs might be interstellar spacecraft, versus, say, how they handled things later in the 1970s and 80s and going forward with the famous TikTok case, where all of a sudden there's this declassification, apparently, of video footage of a UFO and so on. And Bruce mentioned a couple of important points, and that is the release of UFO data by the FBI and CIA. These are formerly classified memos. Well, what Bruce didn't say, and he can continue from this point, is that, as I recall, it was you, Dr. Maccabee, who got this material out for the public to see. That's true, yes?
Some of it, yes.
Okay, so why don't you take it from there? Continue with what you were saying before I had to interrupt you with the commercial break.
The Air Force in 1947 sort of established a tradition that there was nothing to UFOs, and this tradition was confirmed in concrete, you might say, during the 1952 flap, when the Air Force publicly denied that anything unusual was going on. It was all natural phenomena, in spite of the fact that we know from other information that the top level Air Force people seriously considering interplanetary. Now, that information not from the Air Force files itself, but from the FBI of all people. I remember I said that in 1947, the Air Force called in the FBI to find out if there was any communist subversion going on, generating spurious UFO reports that would clog communication channels or whatever. And the FBI didn't find any evidence of communist subversion, but a communications channel had been established between the FBI and the Air Force intelligence. And in that channel, the Air Force numerous times gave to the FBI evidence that the Air Force wasn't telling to the American people. In particular, in 1952, we found a couple of cases where the FBI was told that top-level Air Force people are seriously considering interplanetary as an explanation. General Sanford, the head of intelligence at the time, in 1952, and July 29th, held a press conference in which he said everything was natural phenomena. But it was his own office, people from his own office in Air Force Intelligence, who told the FBI that interplanetary was being considered as a possibility. So anyway, I found that out in 1977 when I wrote a Freedom of Information Act request to the FBI for information. Actually, on a photo case I was working with, you're familiar with the McMinnville case. That's
yes.
To get the FBI file. I wanted information on Paul Trent. If the FBI had any information on Paul Trent. And then I said, oh, by the way, if you got anything else on UFOs, let me know. I didn't expect to get anything. And I ended up getting 1,600 pages of stuff out of the FBI. About the same time, the CIA was being sued and released about 900 pages in December of 1978. And over the next 10 years, Air Force Intelligence and other organizations coughed up numerous documents. So there's, I don't know how many thousands of pages of stuff you could get a hold of now if you really want to read everything. And to extend this to the rest of the world, there have been releases of UFO files by a number of countries now,
Mm-hmm.
including Great Britain, most recently releasing stuff little by little. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff which was initially classified, at least secret. If there was top secret stuff, I wouldn't be surprised, but it's been well buried, shall we say.
Well, well, how do you compare?
I base my conclusions, I should
Mm-hmm.
point out, not so much on things like the Roswell case and stuff, but my own investigations of testimony that's highly credible witnesses and wherever possible, optical and other types of sensors that are used in the case. I have one in particular. In the last case in my book, I wrote a book called the FBI-CIA UFO Connection. The last case in that book is a magnetic case. Very impossible. I mean, the guy was using a device used to detect metal pipes underground for oil, looking for oil, where they were drilling for oil. They would drive a metal casing down in the ground and then cap it off. And he would use a thing known as a magnetic gradiometer to locate where the tops of these pipes were.
Mm-hmm.
And he used that to walk through an area behind his house where his wife had seen a classic flying saucer type thing leave from. He walked around with this magnetic device and it was going off, indicating a huge field. This was recorded. The effects on his gradiometer were recorded on videotape by a couple of guys investigating the case, and so you can do actual magnetic measurement of the field strength and find that there's a huge magnetic field in an area where there's no metal at all. I was told that the strength of the field was comparable to standing 30 feet in front of a destroyer ship. I was told that by a guy who worked for the Navy and mines.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have known that. But the point is that there are physical effect cases of various types that have been detected throughout the world that back up just the witness testimony. But there are numerous cases where the witness testimony is also good. And I would recommend anybody read the 3 Minutes in June case, which is the most thorough analysis of the Kenneth Arnold case and all the explanations that have been offered to get an idea of how witness testimony can be analyzed and give you a good idea of whether or not it's accurate, and you should believe that something really strange had been observed by the witness. All the analysis is in that little book.
Don't you think it's safe to say, this is at least my view, right or wrong, that in order to really understand the so-called UFO phenomenon today in a full context, you really also need to understand what was going on in 1947?
Well, certainly, if you knew nothing about the prehistory of the subject, shall we say, and you're coming in new and learning about the Tic Tac case, objects that certainly seem to be solid objects doing strange things, you can arrive at some conclusion about the Tic Tac case, but it doesn't tell you, like the argument of the Air Force setting up these projects to collect information to find out what's going on in the outside world without allowing anybody to know what the Air Force itself is doing in its own inside world in the secret and top secret levels. But not knowing the history is sort of like studying the subject with your legs cut off, or trying to run with your legs cut off.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the reason I'm saying this is because, folks, I would encourage you to get this book, because as I explained in the last episode, I think it was, or maybe the previous one on the show, if the Arnold sighting does represent a real event, meaning we were visited by another race and they flew and their craft was seen, Arnold saw it, others did well as well, the ramifications of that are, you can't even put them into words. On the other hand, if it was just a hysteria and he was mistaken, then we need to know that too, because we've got wonderful things like nuclear weapons. So regardless of what's going on, we can only learn from whatever the ultimate answer is to each UFO case. And this is why I've been fascinated by this and other so-called paranormal type things. I cringe to try to put UFOs in the paranormal because I don't think they belong there. In fact, I don't even think there is a paranormal. I think there's just the laws of physics in the universe, and it's all one big thing. I don't think there can be a set of laws in physics that are aside from themselves. It's all part of a larger whole. But of course, Bruce would be more of an expert on that. But what I want to do next week when Bruce is back is I want to get into the minutia of some famous cases. This is everything from the Tic Tac case to the famous Trent photos of May 11, 1950 that Bruce has famously analyzed over the years. We can talk about some other cases as well. But Bruce, I have to ask you this before we go. I want you to promise us that opening in the show next week, you'll tell us about the planned briefing, or you were asked to brief the, I believe it was CIA or president or something like that on UFOs. Tell us what happened, and then also we want to talk about the TikTok case.
Yeah, well, that's certainly certainly possibility. We'll probably know more about the Tic Tac case next week than we know now. Than we know this week, because information is coming out as we speak, more or less, with more and more of the witnesses that were involved having their particular stories.
So you're saying there's new information breaking on that case?
Yes.
Okay. I have to ask you this. With the time we have left, which is roughly a minute before we have to end it for this week, and I thank you again for being on the show, why would the government just say, here it is, folks, we can't explain it? That seems to go against the idea they're going to cover it up.
Well, I think there is a cover-up. It's called the self-cover-up. This is a subject that few people want to know is real. They try to ignore it as much as possible. The government is doing right now with this Tic Tac case what it did 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, trying to either ignore the thing completely or pass it off as some slightly abnormal
event. Okay, we have to end it there. We'll be back next week. Join us again next week here on Kal's Corner Radio. Thank you, folks.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.